So I've got a couple of examples to show you today. I do have something up on my blog under week 7, but it's mainly just the completed example files and the screencast from last year. So I will update those with the completed files and the screencast that I'm doing this week as well. But basically I've got two different examples that I want to show you, and I've based these off of what people have commonly sort of indicated that they've wanted to do in their submissions for their first assignment. So the second one sort of follows on from the first one, but the first one is outputting WordPress post content in a JavaScript Lightbox. So rather than opening up the post content in a new page, having it open up as an overlay. And then following on from that is how to achieve a one-page site layout with WordPress while still using as much of the benefits of the WordPress templating engine as we can. So there might be some more complex things that you'll see me do today, and don't worry if it doesn't all make sense straight away. Okay, we'll have the screencast up there. I'm sure it will make more sense as you go through and attempt it yourself. But also, even if you don't really follow exactly what I'm doing, you should still be able to take the example code that I give you and modify that to work for your own purposes. Okay, so I'll be using the last week's template as a starting point for today, so continuing on from this. Okay, so we'd ended up having a bunch of different template files representing different sections of our site. Okay, so we had a front page template, we had a category template which displayed our cats and dogs posts, we had a category blog template which displays our blog, we saw how we can have external links in the menu, and finally page templates as well. Okay, so and then we had some various sidebar templates as well. So I'll be using this as a starting point for the examples that I'm going to show you today. So the first thing I want to do, essentially the main change that I'm going to make to this template in order to do the Lightbox overlay thing is, instead of when I click on this it opens up in a new page, what I want is for this single.php template content to actually open up in an overlay without navigating to a new page here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to need is actually some sort of Lightbox plugin. Now there's a whole bunch of these style of Lightbox plugins that you could use. Okay, I'm going to use one called Magnific Pop-Up for no particular reason. Okay, so but you should be able to adapt this same process to any of the other Lightbox plugins that you might be able to find. So the first thing I'm going to need is to download some of the files for this plugin, and in order to do that I'm going to click on this build tool link here in this case, and there's going to be two files that I need for this plugin. There's going to be a JavaScript file and there's going to be a CSS file. Okay, so I'm going to click this generate build button here. Okay, and it allows you to customize various different features. Okay, if you don't need particular features, I'm just going to leave everything at the defaults, but it's going to give me some JavaScript code here. Okay, which all I'm going to do is select all of that and copy that, and in my theme folder I'm going to put this in a JavaScript file somewhere. Okay, so in order to keep my JavaScript files organized, okay, I'm going to create a new directory under my test theme folder here, and I'll just call it JS. And then inside of this I'm going to create a new file called, I'll call it whatever I want, but I'll call this magnific-popup.js, and I'll paste the JavaScript content into there. Okay, so if this is a different plugin it might just give you a link to a JavaScript file to download. Okay, but this is just the process that this particular plugin uses to give you the JavaScript code. Okay, so that's the JavaScript file. And then the second thing I need is a CSS file. okay, which will control the styles of this Lightbox pop-up. So I'm going to click on this link to the CSS version here, okay, and that just gives me a CSS file with a bunch of styles for to style the pop-up there. So again, I'm going to need to include this in my project. So inside my CSS subfolder here, I'm just going to create a new file, and I'll call that magnific-popup.css and paste the CSS code in there. Okay, so I've got the two files that I need in order to make this Lightbox pop-up work now. So the CSS file and the JavaScript file there. Okay, so what I need to do now is actually include those in my template. Okay, so it actually can load those files. So what I'm going to do is go into my existing header.php template file. Okay, and somewhere in my head section here I need to include both of those two files. So including the CSS file is pretty simple. Okay, I'm just going to include it the same way that we've included the previous CSS files that we've used, so our style.css and the normalized.css. Okay, so it's just going to be a regular link tag. Okay, but again, remembering because we're using a WordPress template here, we need to dynamically generate the path to our template directory. Okay, so I'm going to use this bit of PHP that I've used before here again with the blog info function. Okay, so this blog info template URL will output the path up to my template directory, and then I just need to add on to the end of that the rest of the path to my CSS file. Okay, so that's /CSS/magnific-popup.css. Okay, and then that should include my Magnific Pop-Up CSS file here. Okay, so that's included the CSS file, and then I also need to include the JavaScript file as well. Now, when it comes to including JavaScript files, the process within a WordPress theme is a little bit different. So you can sort of you can do it the regular way that you would be used to, which is doing a script with a source tag like this, okay, and then again you could use the blog info and then to generate the path dynamically. But if you do it that way, the regular way, you can run into trouble because WordPress itself uses a whole bunch of JavaScript, and any plugins that you might include also might use a whole bunch of JavaScript. If you just include your JavaScript files in this way, then there's no way that WordPress can guarantee the order that they're included in, and it also can't guarantee that they might not conflict with each other. So the correct or the best practice way of including JavaScript files in a WordPress template is to actually do it by calling some built-in WordPress functions. Okay, so, and because they're WordPress functions, they're PHP, so I'm going to need to write this in between PHP tags. Okay, and there's two WordPress functions that I'm going to use. One of them is called WP_register_script. Okay, and then the second one is going to be called WP_enqueueScript. Okay, so essentially the register script function is all about just telling WordPress, hey, I have this JavaScript file here that I want you to be aware of. Okay, and then the enqueue script actually includes it in the source of the page. So if you can remember back when we did the first tutorial on templating, I talked about these WP head and the equivalent WP footer functions here. Okay, so the reason that we need them is actually because, well, one of the reasons we need them is because this WP enqueue script function actually looks for the location of these in order to know where to inject the JavaScript inclusion statements in there. Okay, so when we actually do set this up and go and look at the page source, you'll notice that where the JavaScript actually ultimately gets output in the page will be in the location either of the WP head or the WP footer function call, depending on settings that we have set up in WordPress. but I believe the default behavior is to output it where this WP head is. Okay, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So we need to look at these functions here. So the WP register script function, okay, and if you want, you can look at this function in the WordPress documentation if you want to look at it in a bit more detail. Okay, but essentially it takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is just where we give our script a short name. You could think of it as like a nickname. So for example, I'll just call this one Magnific Pop-Up. Okay, and then we use that nickname in order to refer to it in later calls when we're using QScript, for example. Okay, the second parameter is the actual path to the script itself. Okay, so in order to generate that, I'm going to use a very similar process to this blog info function call here, except I'm going to use a slightly different version of this function called get blog info. Okay, so which looks like this. Okay, and the only difference between blog info and get blog info is that blog info itself, somewhere inside of that function, will contain an echo statement. So it will actually output the result of getting that bit of information, which in the case of including my CSS file here is what I want it to do. In the case of actually just sending that value as a parameter to this function though, I don't want it to output that value in the page, I just want it to get that value. Okay, so that's why they also have this get blog info function as well as the blog info function. If you just want to get the information that blog info would give you without outputting it immediately to the page, you can use get blog info. Okay, so I'm going to use the parameter template URL again for that. Okay, which builds me up the URL up to the point of my template directory. And then I'm going to build up the rest of that path to my Magnific pop-up JavaScript file here. Okay, which is /js/magnific pop-up.js. Okay, and then it takes a third parameter. Okay, this WP register script function takes a third parameter, which is an array. Okay, and the array is a list of other JavaScript files that this script here might depend upon. Okay, so now it might not depend upon any other scripts in order to run, so we can just pass it an empty array, or you can probably just pass it nothing there. Okay, but actually in the case of this Magnific pop-up script, and you'll probably find this with most or a lot of Lightbox plugins, is it actually uses jQuery. Okay, so it actually requires that you include jQuery before the script itself in order to run. Otherwise, it won't work because it will be calling jQuery functionality that doesn't exist. Okay, so what I actually need to do is register, well, seemingly what I need to do is register the jQuery script as well. Okay, so I could download the jQuery JavaScript files, okay, and include them in here and do a similar thing where I call WP register script and link to jQuery, okay, like that. But usefully, WordPress itself actually includes a whole bunch of JavaScript libraries, including jQuery. So if we actually go and look in our WordPress installation at this folder called WP includes, okay, you'll notice that there's a folder called JS, okay, and that contains a whole bunch of JavaScript files, including a folder of jQuery and a bunch of jQuery plugins as well. Okay, so we can actually include jQuery without downloading the files ourselves, simply by referring to its short name. And you can find a list of all the included JavaScript libraries in the WordPress documentation. Okay, so there's a list here, and they're actually listed under the documentation for this WP and Q script function. Okay, and it tells you all of the nicknames, or it calls them here handles of the scripts. So in order to include jQuery, all we really have to do is use this short name jQuery here, and we can enqueue the script that way. So what I can actually say in my call to WP register script here for the magnific pop-up JavaScript file, if I want to set jQuery as one of its dependencies, I just simply put the nickname to jQuery in here. Okay, and that will use WordPress's already included built-in jQuery library there. And what that means, these dependencies means, is that if we now try to enqueue this script, okay, if we were to call WP enqueue script and call and pass it magnific pop-up here, okay, what it will do is it will go and look for this script that we've registered, okay, and it will go and find it based on this path that we've passed in the registration function here. But then it will also look in the dependencies, and if it has a dependency for something here, in this case jQuery, it will say don't output that script into the page yet. First, go and output all of its dependencies, and then go and output this script. Okay, so what this ensures is that if we ever try and enqueue the magnific pop-up script, it will make sure that jQuery is already included first of all. Okay, so we should actually be able to see the result of this outputting in our page now. So if I go back over to my main site and I go to my code inspection tools, like this, and I go up to elements here. Okay, so first of all, I can see that there's my magnific pop-up CSS included there in the head section. If I click on that, I can see the code actually there. And if I look down here, I should be able to see the magnific pop-up JavaScript file included here, and if I look just above it, okay, I can see that it's also included jQuery here, okay, from that WP includes folder, and it's also included a jQuery migrate plugin, which is just an extra jQuery file that allows code written for older versions of jQuery to work with the new one. Okay, but the important thing is, by adding that dependency, it's included jQuery there before it's included magnific pop-up. Okay, now I actually need one extra script here, because I need to write some of my own JavaScript in order to initialize the magnific pop-up functionality. So what I'm going to do is, in my JavaScript folder here, I'm going to create a new JavaScript file again, and this will contain my own script. So again, you can call this whatever you like. I'm going to call it main.js. Okay, and just to test that this works, I'll put an alert in here to make sure that that gets queued up, and I'll go back to my header, and I'm going to again I'm going to need now to register this second script that I've created. Okay, so I'll say WP_register script. Okay, in this case I'll give my main.js script a nickname of main, and I'll generate the path to it using this same process here, get blog info. Okay, and then create the rest of the path here, /js/main.js. Okay, and then finally I will pass the dependencies for my main.js file. Now, my main.js file is going to make calls to the magnific pop-up script. Okay, so I'm going to tell this register script function that if I ever include my main.js file, make sure that it loads the magnific pop-up script. Okay, so I'll pass this here, magnific-pop-up. Okay, so I'm referring to the nickname or the handle that I gave it here. Okay, and now what I can do is just enqueue my main script here like this. Okay, and so now what this will do we'll do sort of a waterfall or a recursive thing. It will go, okay, go and find the script that I've registered called main, which it gets here. It gets the path to the script, and then it says what dependencies does main have. In this case, it has a dependency of magnific popup. So before outputting main.js into my header, make sure I output magnific popup. So then it will go and look for a script that I've registered called magnific popup. Do the same thing, get the path to the script and check it for dependencies. It has a dependency of jQuery, so it will make sure that jQuery gets output first. So it will output jQuery, then it will output magnific popup, and then it will output my main script. Okay, so by just calling one of these in QScripts, I actually get those 3 output. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with me enqueuing all 3 of these scripts. So enqueuing jQuery and then enqueuing magnific popup and then enqueuing main. Okay, I could do that and it will achieve the exact same result, but I don't need to write those extra 2 lines because I've set up the dependencies for each of those other scripts when I've registered them here. Okay, so all I need to do is include the main script. So this should generally be your process when you're including any JavaScript files in your WordPress template, is you register them, and generally one will be dependent on another. Okay, so you might have something that's dependent on jQuery. I might even just have my main script dependent on jQuery, and I could have set that as jQuery here. Okay, but you'll register a bunch of scripts, set up their dependencies, and then just enqueue the one that has all of the other dependencies, and then they will all be automatically included. Okay, so if I refresh that now, I should, if everything's worked correctly, see an alert from my main script. There it is there, just testing. Okay, and I should see in order of my scripts being included, there's jQuery, then there's magnific popup, and then finally there's main.js there. Okay, so I can be safely assured now that my scripts are included properly. What I am going to do, because this is all using jQuery, and anytime we write some jQuery, it's a good idea to put it inside of this document.ready event handler to make sure that our code doesn't execute until the whole page is downloaded and everything's ready to go. Okay, but there is one extra thing that you need to know when writing jQuery code within a WordPress theme, and it's that this shortened version of the document.ready handler won't actually work. So if I put my alert in here, what I'll find is that this won't actually fire off. That will never get to that code. So if I refresh the page here, okay, you'll notice the alert doesn't show up, and down in my console here I get a error that says uncaught type error undefined is not a function. Now what that's actually telling me is that it doesn't recognize this $sign function here. Now normally when we use jQuery, we can use this $sign function as a shorthand for writing jQuery like this every time. Okay, but WordPress by default doesn't let you do that because it operates in what's called jQuery no conflict mode. Okay, which just means that if for some reason another plugin also includes its own version of jQuery, it doesn't want those to accidentally mess with each other. Okay, so but we can still make use of using the $sign function within our ready handler by simply rewriting our document.ready handler like this. So instead of looking like this, okay, we replace that first $sign with jQuery, and then we simply pass the $sign as a parameter to the ready function handler that we create. Okay, and then you write everything else as usual. Okay, so that's the only difference when you're writing your jQuery for WordPress. And if you want to look up more about the reasons for that, you can look into you can go and search for jQuery no conflict mode, and it will tell you all about that. Okay, but if you don't really care about that and you just want to know how to get it to work, that's how you need to write your jQuery document.ready handler. Okay, so if I test this again, alright, I get the alert show up and I no longer get that error. Okay, so I can be sure that that bit of JavaScript now is being accessed and working. Okay, so I'm ready now to actually write the code to initialize my, my magnific pop-up functionality. But I will just mention one more thing first of all. Okay, the other benefit of using this method of including your JavaScript files is that even though I'm calling WP and QScript here, that's not controlling where it's actually being output. Okay, it's actually this called a WP head that's being controlling where the JavaScript is output. So the benefit of this is I could actually go and take this bit of code here, and given that the only part of my website where I actually want the pop-up functionality to happen is in the cats and the dogs section, okay, and they both use the category.php template, then what I could do is only include those JavaScript files in my category.php template. Okay, so I could just include those here. Okay, and that means on any of those other files that include the header, it's not loading those files if it doesn't need them. Okay, so that's the other useful thing about generating your JavaScript calls this way, is that you can conditionally include them only when you need them. So you could do that. I'm not going to do that for this example just because I don't want to over confuse things, and I'll keep everything kind of in the same place. Okay, but that's the other thing you can do. Now the last thing about this is you actually have an equivalent. Equivalent versions of these WP register script and WP and QScript functions that work for CSS styles as well. So while we've included the CSS style here in the normal way that we would for a static website, we could actually use equivalent functions of these two to include our CSS styles that way as well. Okay, so you've got a function called WP register style, okay, and a equivalent function to Q, which is WP underscore and Q style, like this as well. Okay, and essentially they're the exact same thing, okay, except they just take two parameters, the handle or nickname for the style. So in this case, let's say I want to include this magnific pop-up CSS this way. Okay, and then the second parameter is the path. Okay, so the same two parameters, we just don't have this dependency array. Okay, because CSS doesn't have dependencies in the same way that JavaScript does. Okay, so I would generate the path to my CSS file in the same way that I've done to my JavaScript files here. Okay, and then in order to include the CSS style sheet, okay, again I just make a call to enqueue style with the nickname that I created for that style sheet. Okay, so that achieves the same thing as including the style there. But then again, you have the benefit now of I can put this anywhere in the code that I want. So if I only need to include the style sheet on a particular template file, then I can go and put those calls to register style and enqueue style just on those templates. Okay, so I won't say any more about those functions, but if you want to read up more on those, just go and look up the WordPress documentation for those two functions and for those two functions for the JavaScript and the equivalent functions for the CSS. Alright, so now I actually want to get this to do something. Okay, so I want to actually generate the Lightbox pop-up content. So in order to do that, I'm going to refer to the documentation on this magnific pop-up site. Okay, and it will give me code examples of how I actually achieve that, how I have to structure my HTML and how I have to structure my JavaScript to get this to work. Now, one important thing to know first of all is basically the documentation here is all split up into different sections depending on the type of content that we're loading into that Lightbox pop-up. Okay, so in the case of what we want to do is load this page content. Okay, the type of content that we're actually loading into here is Ajax content. Okay, so rather than simply loading an image or a video or something like that, what we want to do is actually go and retrieve the content of a page using an Ajax call and then load that into the Lightbox pop-up. Okay, so the area of the documentation that I want to refer to is this one here, which says the Ajax type. Okay, and this gives me some explanation and also code examples of what I need to do to get this to work. So basically what I need to do to get this to work is in my HTML, I need to assign some sort of class so that I can select all of the links that I want to generate this Lightbox pop-up. Okay, so for example here they've assigned a class to this a tag called Ajax pop-up link, and then what you do is in your JavaScript you basically write a jQuery selector to select all of those A tags that have that class Ajax pop-up link, and then you simply make a call to the magnific pop-up function and pass it an object, which is this part. Okay, so the curly braces represents an object and it has one property in it, type, with the value of Ajax. Okay, so essentially we need to go and do exactly these two things in our own code. So I'll do the first part first, adding the class to the A tags that I want to generate a Lightbox pop-up. Okay, and they're going to be the ones that appear in my category.php template. Okay, so you can see down here I have this anchor tag which contains the post thumbnail and also the caption. Okay, so if I go and inspect that element, okay, there's my anchor tag here with it's already got a class of Polaroid, okay, but it surrounds basically everything that I want to be clickable in order to trigger this pop-up window. So this is the tag that I'm going to add an additional class to in order to select any of the pop-up links that I want to work. Okay, so I could call it again whatever I want, but just to be consistent with their example in the documentation, I'll use this class name here, Ajax-pop-up-link. Okay, so I'll paste that in there, and now the nice thing again about this is because it's in a PHP loop, there's only one place I have to do this. Okay, so for each one of those thumbnails, it's going to be outputting this same code. Okay, so now each of these should get a class of Polaroid and a second class of Ajax pop-up link, like that. Okay, so that's the first part. Then the second part is I need to go to my main.js file. Okay, and I'm going to write the same JavaScript code that it gives for the example here. Okay, so the first thing is I need to write a jQuery selector which will select all of these links for me, which represent my little Polaroid links. Okay, so that's going to be $ and then anything with the class, so .ajax pop-up link. Okay, so that selects them all, and then in order to initialize them as a magnific pop-up, okay, I would just call on that the .magnific pop-up function. And to that function we pass an object. Okay, so the curly braces is how we define an object, and we pass it, in the simplest case, one property called type, okay, with the string value Ajax. Okay, and that gives the magnific pop-up plugin all the information it needs to know in order to create our pop-up functionality. Okay, so I've got that in there. I've saved that. All of this is uploaded to my server. I'll go back to the page now. Okay, and I'll click on one of these links, and if everything's worked correctly, we should see a Lightbox pop up. Okay, so you can see that all of the content that would otherwise have been loaded in the href of that link in a new page is now included as content in this Lightbox pop-up. Okay, so we actually didn't have to, we only had to write a couple of little bits of our own code in order to get that to work. Probably the harder bit was making sure everything links up correctly. Now there's still a few things that aren't quite ideal with this. You can see that it's actually included the header and the footer as well as the content. Now I don't really see any reason to have that, so what I really want it to do is just load the content itself. Alright, but it makes sense why it's done that, because it's still loading the page that would otherwise be my single.php template. Okay, so it's loading everything in here. Okay, and my single.php template is including my header and my footer. Okay, so the quickest, easiest way of getting this to work is simply just to go into our single.php template and remove the calls to get header and get footer. Okay, then when I load one of these, okay, it will only load up the content. Okay, but let's just say you, and if that's all you want, if the only way you ever intend to view this content is via a Lightbox pop-up, then that's all you really need to do. You could stop here with this example. Okay, but let's just say you still want to have the option of, for some reason, in some other part, maybe you're linking to them off the blog or something, you want to open up the content of the single post in its own window. Okay, in that case, if I do it now, you'll notice because I've removed the header and the footer, okay, I don't get any of my styles, I don't get any of the JavaScript loaded, I just literally get the content that's being output in the single.php template, or that WordPress loop. So you can actually have both. You can actually have the best of both worlds, and it requires a bit more work, but I'll show you how you can achieve that. So essentially, if we think about it logically, what we want to do is in our single.php template, we want to have something where we can say, all right, if this request came from the Lightbox Ajax thing, then don't include the header and the footer. But if it didn't come from the Lightbox Ajax request, if it was just a normal request, then do include the header and the footer. Okay, so we can set up a bit of logic like that by modifying what we actually send along with this call to Magnific pop-up. So just like you can send information along in the URL with your get parameters, okay, you can send that as part of an Ajax call as well. All right, and if we look in the documentation down here, okay, and it basically gives us some information about how we can send extra information along with the Ajax call. And what it's basically telling you here is that it will extend the default Ajax object that jQuery sends. Okay, and you can look that up if you care. Okay, on the jQuery documentation. Okay, this is the actual jQuery Ajax function call, which takes a whole bunch of parameters, and basically this is what Magnific pop-up is extending when it's sending that call to go and get the content from that page. Okay, now it may seem a bit convoluted and long-winded, okay, but just know that all of the things that I'm going to enter I can find those in parameters in here. Okay. Now, if you actually care about exactly what they are and how they work and why they work, then by all means you can come and read through this documentation. Okay. But if all you care about is what you need to write in order to get this to work, okay, then just take my word for it. This is how you have to structure the code for this particular Lightbox plugin. Okay. So what I need to do is for the object passed to the Magnific pop-up function. Okay, I'm going to add another parameter here called Ajax. Okay, and that itself will be an object which will have a we'll have a object inside of that called settings, which itself is also an object, and inside of that I'm going to pass two things. Okay, I'm going to pass I might just refer to my completed example for this. Okay, yep. Okay, so this settings object will take two properties. One is type, okay, and that's just where I tell it what type of HTTP method I'm using to send the data. Okay, so we have a get type and a post type, and that will just determine on the other end in PHP whether I use the get parameters or the post parameters. So I'm going to send this using get, and then this settings object is going to have one final object called data. Okay, and this will constitute then the information that I send along with my AJAX request. Okay, so I can then pass it any key value pairs that I want. I'm going to send it a property called request type, and I will send that a value of AJAX like this. Okay, and so that long convoluted sequence of objects, basically all that does is ensure that now in my PHP, in my category.php file, no sorry, in my single.php file, I should now be able to access in the PHP get parameters array. So if you remember the thing that looks like this, $_get, okay, which contains the information that we can send along with the request, I should now be able to look for a property called request type like this, okay, which I've set here, that property, and I should be able to check if it has a value of AJAX. So now if this get request type property does have a value of AJAX, then I know that the request call has come from the Magnific pop-up JavaScript. If that doesn't exist, then I can assume that it's just a normal request to that page. So now I have something where I can set up a condition where I can decide whether I want to include the header and footer or not. Okay, so so what I'll do first of all here is I'm going to set up a I'll set up a PHP variable called AJAX request. Okay, and I'm going to give it a default value of false. Okay, so my default case is that it's not a request from the JavaScript Lightbox, it's just someone trying to open the page. So in this case I'm going to say now I can conditionally include the header and the footer. So I can say if AJAX request equals false, okay, then I can call the function get header like this, and it will include the header. Okay, now I can write this in shorthand by just saying if not AJAX request like this. Okay, that's the same thing as saying if AJAX request is equal to false. Just a shorthand way of saying that. Okay, so if it's not an AJAX request, then call get header, and I'll do the same thing down here and say if it's not an AJAX request, then get footer. Okay, now at the moment I'm never changing this value of AJAX request, okay, so that's always going to equal false, so it's always going to include the get header and the get footer. Okay, so I should see if I refresh this page now using single.php, it's obviously including my header and footer file. So all I need to do now is add where I can change that condition and detect if it's an AJAX call, and then change the value of this AJAX request to true. Okay, so I'll add this up here, and I can say if that get parameter of request type is equal to AJAX, then AJAX request equals true. Okay, so now what it's going to do, if it is coming from the AJAX request, okay, if it is coming from this call to magnific pop-up, this request type data with the value of AJAX will be sent. Okay, so initially AJAX request will be set to false by default, but then it will see that that get request type is equal to AJAX, so it will set AJAX request to true. Okay, and then this statement now no longer evaluates to true. Okay, so AJAX request, it is an AJAX request, so not AJAX request is false, and which means it won't include the get header and the get footer. Okay, so there's a bit of double negatives going on here. But basically you can simplify this to say, this whole thing to say, if it's an AJAX request, don't include the header and the footer. If it is an AJAX, if it is an AJAX request, don't include the header and the footer. Otherwise, do include the header and the footer. Okay, so now with that conditional information in there, alright, we can go and check both of those cases. Alright, so I'll refresh my normal page here, and I'll just do a regular click. This should open up in a Lightbox, and I shouldn't see the header and the footer be displayed. Okay, so there we go, I just get the content. But now if I open it up in its own window, okay, I do get the header and the footer displayed. Okay, now there's one final thing I need to deal with here. I get this notice being output by PHP. It's not an error, but it's just telling me that I'm trying to access something that doesn't exist, this request type thing. So basically what that's saying is, in the case where this is not an AJAX request, I'm attempting to access this thing here that doesn't exist. So it's outputting a notice for me. So what I can do is modify this statement in order to get rid of that, and basically say, don't bother checking the value of request type until you've checked that it actually exists. So I can use this PHP function first called isSet. Get request type. And okay, so now it reads like this. It says, if this request type property is actually set, so if it actually exists, and the request type is equal to AJAX, then set AJAX request to true. Okay, so what this means is that if this property isn't set, it won't bother going to check the second thing. Okay, so if it doesn't exist, I shouldn't get that notice about trying to access the non-existent request type here. Alright, so I should be able to go and refresh this now. Okay, and it removes that problem there. Okay, so it's actually good practice that any time you're attempting to check the value of something like this in an array, that you actually check that it's set first before you check what the value is. Okay, so we do now have a functioning twofold thing, okay, where we can get either just the content or the content with the header and footer being displayed, depending on whether it's opened in a new, in its own browser window, or whether the content's being loaded into a Lightbox overlay. Okay, and this should work, okay, because I've put the this link in the category.php file, okay, which applies to both the dogs and cats category. Okay, without any extra work, this should work for both of those. Okay, now there is one more thing that I want to change about this. What you'll notice is that the when I open this in its own window, okay, because the page by itself has this dark background, okay, there's a decent amount of contrast between the content here and the background. but if I'm loading the content in an overlay, it might not be as obvious on the projector, but for me on my screen here, it's quite distracting still being able to see that much of the content in the background. I don't think there's enough contrast between the foreground and the background. So what I can do here is go and add a new class here to my single.php template. Okay, and where I can apply some more styling to this. So I'm going to copy the styles across from my completed example. Okay, so what I'm going to do is what I will do is add an extra class here of Ajax, let's say. Okay, and then I will, in my style.css, okay, add this style where it says, okay, sorry, I won't add it there, I'll add it okay, class equals Ajax like that. Okay, and then my style will say any main content area that is underneath something with a class of Ajax, style the background this darker version. Okay, so it's a blacker version and it's also more opaque. Okay, so if I refresh the page now and I click on one of these links, okay, we should be able to see that the main content area here, which is underneath a div with a class of Ajax, okay, is having that darker background style applied to it. Okay, so we can see there's the original and then there's the darker one. Okay, so it makes the contrast between the text and the background better for more readable text. Okay, now I'm not quite finished with this because what you'll notice is that that's also applying to this version of the page as well. Okay, so I don't actually want it to apply to this version of the page. I'd like to keep this with its original styling. Okay, so I'd like to keep this looking like that. Okay, so I'm going to use the same methodology that I used in order to selectively include the header and footer in the single.php file. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm only going to include this class equals Ajax if, again, if it's a request type has come from Ajax. Okay, so I'll put a little bit of inline PHP in here and say if Ajax request. Okay, so if it is an Ajax request, then I want to echo that class equals Ajax like that. Okay, so now it will only output this class equals Ajax into this part of the HTML if it was indeed an Ajax request. Okay, so now I should be able to selectively apply that class. Okay, so I'll click on this version here. Okay, that is an Ajax request, so I want to make sure that that class Ajax is being output, and I can see that it is there. Okay, but if I open it in a new tab, okay, I can see that it's worked visually, but I want to double check in the code here. Alright, I can see that the class equals Ajax is not being output there. Okay, so it's not changing that background color. Okay, so I'm almost finished with this example. There's one more thing I want to show you where you can add extra options to how the pop-up works itself. So if you look in the documentation again for the magnific pop-up, okay, you'll notice that it has a feature where you can put things up as a gallery, and all that means is you get some navigation buttons that allows you to go back and forth between items without having to return to the page first. Okay, so there's various different options that can be applied here, but all you need to do to get it the default gallery to work is again add another option to the object that we send to Magnific Pop-Up in the JavaScript called gallery, which itself takes an object of settings, and the only one you need to do to get the simplest case to work is set a property called enabled equal to true. Okay, and what you get then is, if we refresh the page, okay, now I can click on any one of these, alright, and I now get these buttons here, okay, here and here, which allow me to navigate back and forward between items on that page without returning to the page itself. Okay, so most of these Lightbox plugins will have different options which will allow you to customize exactly how these work. Alright, you should be able to customize the style of all this stuff as well. But that'll just be about reading the documentation for that particular plugin and seeing how that works and looking at the code examples. Okay, and this should work also over here as well. Okay, so that is the first example, getting content to load within a JavaScript or a jQuery pop-up, Lightbox pop-up style plugin. And I should just clarify, when I'm saying plugin here, I'm talking about a jQuery plugin, not a WordPress plugin. So I haven't installed anything in the WordPress plugins backend here. I've just included the JavaScript files. Okay, so just to recap the process that we needed to do this, first of all we needed to download the JavaScript and the CSS files, okay, for Magnific Pop-Up. Okay, then we needed to include the CSS files and the JavaScript files in our template, and the way that we did that was a little bit different to what we're used to by using this WP register script and WP and Q script functions for the JavaScript, okay, which took three parameters. Okay, the register script took 3 parameters, a nickname that you give it, the path to the actual script itself, and then an array of dependencies. And the dependencies make sure that this script gets loaded before this script. Okay, and then to actually include it in our page, we use WP and Q script, and then if we want, we have the equivalent functions which do the same thing, but for CSS files instead of JavaScript files. Okay, so that's how we included the files. Then what we needed to do was basically 2 things. We needed inside of our category.php template to add a class here so that we could in our JavaScript select all of the anchor tags or all of the links that we wanted to operate as a JavaScript pop-up, a Lightbox pop-up, and then we had to write a little bit of our own JavaScript in order to select all of those and then initialize the pop-up options. Okay, and if that's as much as we wanted to work, then we could just stop there, but additionally, if you wanted to have the content display both in a pop-up and also on its own page, okay, then we modified the single.php file to optionally, depending on whether it was an AJAX request, include the header and footer and also an optional extra class.